The voyage of the July 26 movement is disastrous at best. Immediately they lose their bearings. A man falls overboard, though he is eventually saved. And they arrive in Cuba 2 days late, in the middle of the day, and in the wrong part of the country. Upon attempting to land, they hit a sandbar and are forced to wade ashore and then stumble into a swamp, where unfortunately they are quickly attacked by Batista's air forces and scattered. The next 3 days are full of attempting to regroup and avoiding the enemy. Unfortunately, on the third day, an ambush finds them and attacks. Che is wounded in the neck and forced to lighten his load. He is carrying two things at this time, a med kit and his rifle and ammunition. It is noted by someone in their journal later that it was hardly a decision and happened instantaneously that Che dropped the med kit, grabbed his rifle, and ran into the woods. When Che finally regroups with the main group, he finds that only 17 of their original 82 remain, an enormous blow to the revolution. In fact, the group was so small that attacks originally reported that Fidel and Che had both been killed. Unbeknownst to most people, however, the small group continues along the southern shore into the Sierra Maestra Mountains, where Fidel has decided that will be the base of operations for the guerrilla warfare. The Sierra Maestra has a large peasant population, which the movement uses to their advantage. They ask for food, which they receive in most cases, although this was likely due to the fact that it was a bunch of bearded, smelly men with guns wanting food, rather than class solidarity. Fidel begins to attempt to recruit the peasants, and does so by stealing or liberating cows from local landowners and giving them to the peasants, of course a very popular move. The first offensive military action Fidel launches is to attack a local military base. This will be Che's first real military battle. On January 22nd, 1957, the group ambushes a military patrol, and Che finds himself face to face with the enemy. There is a moment in which he sees a soldier in front of him. He fires and the man falls. He is forced to stop for a moment to figure out how he feels about the situation. He wrote later that he felt fine. A time after the battle, it is discovered that one of the original July 26 movement, one Timio Guevara, is a spy, and Fidel has sentenced him to death. It is, as Che wrote in his journal later, it was him that was to execute Timmy himself. He describes the event in vivid detail, first binding the man, taking his items, talking to him for a moment, putting a revolver to his head, and firing. Che afterwards examines both the entry and exit wound, very much the doctor that he had been trained to be, even in instances over his ex-comrade, writing down later that he had slept fine with what he had done, and that times like these you could not tolerate even the suspicion of treason. During the entire two-year campaign, it is expected that Che executed at least dozens of traitors, a grim look onto his future role in the Cuban government. The movement continued to sweep through the Sierra Maestra Mountains, and at one point newspaper articles were published stating that the mighty rebel uprising, led by Fidel and Che, numbered in the 100 to 150 range. Apart from being a gross overestimation of the rebels' roughly 20 numbers, it also brought to light that Che and Fidel had in fact survived the third-day ambush. This prompted Batista to send 1,500 soldiers to hunt down the rebels. Unfortunately, at this point, Batista's soldiers, using information they gathered around the country, began targeting peasants as rebel sympathizers, resulting in several occasions of surrounding houses and firing into them. Unfortunately for them, rounding up peasants and shooting them, because at one point they had been afraid of being shot by bearded men wanting food, is not a very popular action to take amongst peasants, and thus the rebellion grew by the peasants who had lost family members. At the same time, recruiters began appearing in began appearing in cities, and the new recruits were often introduced to Che very first. As the doctor, he of course had to treat a lot of the health concerns that occurred throughout the very trying journey through very harsh conditions, treating everything from infected mosquito bites to exhaustion and dysentery. He became known as the tooth puller among the rebel soldiers for his rough treatment of patients and the pain that he inflicted during his treatments. Along with his doctor's duties, Che was known as an outstanding soldier, often leading at the front lines, while Fidel would often find a place to hide himself. Che would lead the troops, earning him a very respectable relationship with the recruits of the movement. Another commentator put it very well when he said that Che's, willingness to confront death, to take life to risk his own life, came together to form a charisma that is highly unusual, and which gave him an almost legendary reputation as he emerged as a man which some feared and others admired. Seeing his ability in battle, Fidel promotes Che to commandant and puts him in charge of 75 men that are known as column number 4. Many of the young men in his column come to give a great deal of respect to Che, and they become known as Los Cachorros, or Che's Cubs. Che acted as the commander, father, and older brother to many of them, teaching by example, but also giving them lessons on reading, writing, and general education. However, he was a very strict leader, often withholding food for days for even minor offenses. By October, Che had a new base in an area called La Mesa and starts to organize, creating an armory, bakery, butcher, and even a newspaper called El Cubana Librea. By February 1958, they are broadcasting messages on their own radio station. It is late that year that Che meets Elena Marsh, who has worked with the July 26 movement, smuggling weapons and messages from cities to the rebels. On one occurrence, her cover is blown and she is forced to stay with the rebels. Her and Che quickly become lovers. After 18 months in the Sierra Maestra, Fidel orders Che to take command of his column and march to a small town outside of Santa Clara, Cuba's fourth largest, and one which was a mere 4 hours from Havana. Che used a small group of men to attack military provinces with psychological warfare. One tactic they often would use is that one man would creep up to a military base behind cover, fire a single shot, and wait for essentially the wall of fire that was to return. He would then go home and go to sleep. This would happen once, and then the next night they would send 2 men, one at 11, one at 4. The next night, the base would not be sleeping, and by the end of the week, almost on every occasion, the base was cleared out. On December 27th, 1958, Fidel Castro orders Che to take his forces into Santa Clara, which was the last bastion of Batista's forces, where Che engages a force 10 times his size. Che soldiers, however, are well-bonded, well-trained, and ready and willing to die for the cause. This in comparison to Batista's forces, which are poor soldiers who have lost the will to fight because of information about the rebellion's success, and who have no real stake in the continuation of Batista's government. The battle officially ends when more members of the July 26 movement hijack an armored train and reinforcements are delivered to the city. The surrender of the troops in Santa Clara prompted Batista to gather his top officials, several $1 million, and flee Havana. As news of Batista's surrender circled around Cuba, soldiers surrendered, and Fidel, as the rest of the July 26 movement, headed to Havana. It's interesting to note at this time that while Che was ordered to march directly on Havana and begin to seize control, Che grabbed a jeep and began taking Fidel grabbed a jeep and began taking a very long parade-like march into Havana, spanning almost the entire length of the island. As Che enters Havana, he quickly has to set more oppressive measures on these young men who, after 2 years in the mountains, are now entered into the Vegas-like society of the America's basically dirty night tourist attraction. Hilde, Che's wife, who had not seen Che in the last 2 years, immediately departs to Cuba, not aware that there's another woman. As she arrives, Che immediately tells her that he no longer loves her and wants a divorce. Che marries Elena just a few months later. Castro takes the position of Prime Minister on February 16, 1959, and at this point is not yet calling himself a Marxist. His affiliation to Che, however, calls this into question, and with the fear that Che's radical Marxism will threaten his public face, he begins to, at least superficially, distance himself from Che. He assigns Che to take over La Cabana Fortress, which is a garrison located over Havana Harbor and was used for trying war criminals and members of the past regime.